very brilliant fellows and non-fellows to discuss cyber wars, transatlantic security, and Huawei. It is not a secret that we are in the middle of a cyber war. Chinese incursions in the US and Europe have been occurring almost daily, but some governments don't seem to realize the complexity of the issue or the risk that it poses to our security. Here to discuss this with me are Hermann Terstch, our distinguished fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy and a member of the European Parliament for Spain, Jeff Hoffman, our cyber fellow at the Gold Institute, and Eitan Charnoff, founder of Potomac Strategy, a United Arab Emirates-based consultancy guiding the MENA region governments and corporations on geopolitical and security issues. Good evening, gentlemen.
Evening.
Good evening.
And let's go through this. I know that you are busy and have many more things to do today, and I appreciate your taking the time for this. So let's start in the order that I introduce you, and if you wonder why, is that's how I'm looking at you on the screen. No particular precedence. And what we're going to do is you're going to tell me of this broad subject of cyber wars, national security, and Huawei, a 7 minute uh, uh, free reign to tell me what is in your mind. And we're going to use that for a discussion at the end. So, Herman,
Yes. Well, I'm not a cyber expert nor a security expert, but I'm going to explain a little bit the political aspects that we are seeing in this and the security risks that are evolving from some of the developments of policies in Europe and in the transatlantic world. Spain plays a significant role, and a very dangerous role, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people who are observing this development in the last times. We have to we have to start from a very peculiar situation. Right? The peculiar situation is that we have in Spain very radical left-wing government by now, which has been evolving in the last 7 years to this position. It's a coalition of socialists and communists in alliance with all the groups, the little groups of the periphery, separatists, Basque, Catalan separatists, and other radical groups that give this tiny majority to Pedro Sanchez, who is the prime minister of the socialist communist government. This government has, and the parties which are in it, have a very close relation with some of the most, let's say, dangerous regimes in Latin America, what we call Iberoamerica, mainly with Cuba, but mainly with Venezuela, and with other groups that are in this region, exerting alliances in which China always plays a role. Uh, this government in Spain, which started in this evolution 2004 after the attacks in the station in Atocha rail stations in Madrid, very close from here, with 100 90 deaths and 2,000 wounded. The biggest attack in Spain. We had a change, a radical change that was 3 days before the elections, election that was almost completely won. It should have been won by very comfortably by the Conservative Party, but the bombs turned everything upside down. And finally, with a mobilization, a very strategic and well planned mobilization, the left turned around everything. There was huge amount of disinformation, and finally, Zapatero won. Rodriguez Zapatero is a name you will know probably, but if you don't, you have to remember it because it's a key figure in all this evolution of the Chinese and mainly Han Huawei history through Spain. The Chinese influence. He's the man. He's the Chinese man now in Spain and in many parts of the world, also in Latin America. Jose Luis Rodriguez Zapatero came to power on this in this after this March 11th, 2004 bombing, and he turned the curse of the direction of the policies in Spain radically after Jose Maria Aznar, who had been a very Atlantic supporter and a conservative member of the Conservative Party. Well, it's a very centrist party, but being a very, very outspoken defender of the West and of the NATO and of the Transatlantic Pact. Now we suddenly came to have a left, which had nothing to do with the left we had 30 years ago in the 80s with Felipe González, who was slowly convinced for NATO and so on. But we had a very radical left, which was anti-West. It was anti-American, profoundly anti-American, and it has developed in the last 20 years in a very dangerous way. That we have seen it now with the attitude towards Israel. Spain has become through the government of Spain, not Spain. Spain gave, for an example, gave all the points of the winning points of the popular vote in the Eurovision contest were given to Israel. But we have a government which is fanatically anti-Israel, and they are also very, very, very militant against the administration, Trump administration, of course. And there we have this Chinese question, this Chinese development in Spain, which has been a surprise for many people. When we started to know that even with all well, we were very well informed about what was happening with the 5G and how it was really dangerous to get a 5G from Huawei. But we got here the information that we have a Huawei network almost everywhere in the administration. We have them even in some military installations. We have it in the with the deposits, the data banks of the justice is Huawei, and we have them in many other sectors, which was it came in without previous information, without any debate, of course, and with many of these underground contacts of the socialists, and not only the socialists, because then the development of the People's Party has shown that they are also in this huge business. We have a communication agency. Uh, it's called that way, which is called Acento, where you have one co-president is a former socialist minister, Jose Blanco, and the other co-president is a minister of the People's Party government, which is Alfonso Alonso. Both parties are densely represented in this agency Acento, and this Acento agency has took over the lobbying for Huawei in Belgium, in Brussels, for the European Parliament, and they are representing Huawei also here. And they were very, as we see, they are very effective. They are the two main parties in Spain. They are the bipartisan, let's say, coalition that have more or less made alternative governments, but that in the main positions are more or less in the same direction. We have a socialist legislation which is never changed by the People's Party, by the so-called center or center-right party. They always have left untouched the legislation of the left. The left does the laws, makes laws, and the others kept it. And so we came to the situation where we are now with absolute obscure contracts by the administration with Huawei and other Chinese enterprises. And as I say, zero transparency in these questions. Only when some kind of media gets some information about that, we get to know what the administration really is doing with in the relations with China. I would stay there. I would stop there. This is an over. It's an impression. This government here is a not a normal democratic government of Europe. I know in Europe we have every day an evolution which makes democratic normality more strange and more rare. But the Spanish case is a very special case. As I say, they are connected with the Chinese interests in Latin America. They are connected with the whole system of the left wing dictatorships in South America. See Venezuela, see Cuba, and see all the movements, and Lula, who is, by the way, a very dangerous factor as well in the subcontinent in its contacts with China. So we have the relation which in Europe, in Western Europe, in a capital of a NATO country, we have a government which is hostile, which has relations with Tehran as well in a very friendly manner, who has been supportive of Hamas in an absolutely incredible and obnoxious way, and who has with China now, let's say, practically secret relations, because they are not transparent towards the parliament and not transparent
No.
towards
We
society.
we'll try, Herman, to throw some light on that in a little while, as you know. Thank you so much. And Jeff, your vision from this side of the Atlantic is perhaps a little bit different, but how much?
I would actually say America would be much worse off and in a similar position as Spain and other countries across Europe had we not had the reelection of President Donald J. Trump. They put out the AI action plan. The administration did. There's some immediate initiatives to renew the national emergency against foreign adversary cyber. And that is especially China when you look at that and reference, say, the Typhoon series cyber capabilities that they're using. But let's step back and look at it more from a geopolitical perspective, and let me provide some context where I'm coming from. I would say early 2012 timeframe, maybe earlier than that, 2008 actually. I was working for the Air Force. I was working at Defense Intelligence Agency, and I really began to learn and research the technology capabilities of China, People's Republic of China. Following that, I was at the Office of Director of National Intelligence in the private sector capacity, helping produce assessment specifically looking at Huawei and ZTE. And this was during the President Trump's first administration, when you saw some of the restrictive U.S. policies against Huawei. And then more recently, I was in Europe. I was in the UK, and I was helping U.S. European Command stand up cyber capabilities and cyber threat intelligence reporting capabilities for Europe, and also helping out NATO. On a weekly basis, part of that job was to understand the threat in Europe. Obviously, primarily, we were looking at threats to U.S. assets, defense assets, but we also looked at other countries across Europe and saw all the cyber activities that were going on. A lot of that originating from China. And moving forward, while I was in Europe, I wrote a paper. I did a program with King's College Department of War Studies, and the paper was called Revealing China's Plan for Artificial Intelligence Technologies. And I highlighted three specific areas of concern. One, and I have some facts to back this, which I think are important, is obviously economic dominance. In the paper, I think it was a Price Water Cooper a PwC report in 2017 projected that China's GDP would be over 35 trillion by 2030, and at least 7 trillion of that would be enabled as a result of AI technologies and other emerging technologies. And making this more local to Spain, I was just reading an article before getting on this call, and I believe it was Stellantis, a venture that Spanish government is forming, and it highlighted that China was sending at least 2,000 workers to help build a car battery plant in Spain. And I know that the Common Sense Party in Spain was greatly opposing that. The reason I bring this up is because we're also seeing this in America, especially in our rural areas, especially rural areas that have military bases. Whether it's a restaurant, whether it's telecommunications that are owned or indirectly owned through China. So you're really seeing that number one, point there, and that actually is leading to the second concern is China wanting to control the information domain across the globe, frankly. And that's where you really see a lot of the assessment with Huawei, and more specifically, their development and implementation of smart cities. And one of those facts, there was a U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission in January 2020 that said that Beijing had over 800 smart city pilot programs underway. Of that, Huawei contributed to 120 cities in 40 countries. Why would China be so interested in having control of the information domain grid if they didn't want to do something like that, like surveillance? So that's number two. And then number three, I think, is a very obvious one, is the use of the emerging technologies, maybe 5G. If you look at a lot of reporting, some of it actually doesn't reach that 5G level. They just market it that way. But my biggest concern, and we've seen it through SARS, or I guess COVID pandemic, was the lack of safety protocols and ethics. And so when they start using AI and integrating that into military application, say, as one example, command and control, and you lose control of that artificial autonomous weapon system, to me, that puts up a red flag in terms of something that ought to be assessed. And this goes way beyond just a sovereign country. I think NATO also has a role. I don't know if the European Union would be the right form for that. I think China and EU are pretty close. But if you do look at NATO and you look at Article 5, and this will be my last point, Article 5 has been in place, unfortunately, since the terror acts against our country and other countries. But maybe there's reason, to look at Article 5. If one country is compromised with cyber activities, especially critical infrastructure, maybe that means all countries have been attacked through the use of cyber. So those are some points that I bring to this. And overall, I don't think there's much of a difference in terms of what is China's goal, what is their aim, whether it's Spain or whether it's the United States. I think it's dominance, whether that's economy or military. Thank you,
Thank you,
Saul.
Jeff. Thank you. Eitan, you're in a completely different part of the world, and you get a different perspective on these things. What say you?
I don't just want to look at this issue differently based on geography, but I want to look at this topically from a different perspective as well. And I'm going to try to remove my own political opinions and try to just start with some facts and zoom out from there, right? So when we talk about major Chinese market access, right? I want to talk about what that actually means. And if we just talk about electric vehicles, for example, right? Something like 6 to 7% of new vehicle registrations in mainland Europe are Chinese manufacturers when you're looking at hybrid and electric. But beyond, and by the way, the numbers are somewhat comparable in Europe. There's something like 20 plus manufacturers, in China that are producing electric vehicles. Just to sort of give a little bit more color to what we're talking about in terms of just raw metrics and data. And then we remove ourselves for a second from who's manufacturing this infrastructure and simply look at infrastructure itself. I thought it could be interesting for us to talk a little bit about vulnerabilities in general, both from state and non-state actors, focused on electric vehicles in particular. Saul, if that would be okay with you. And then we can put this back into the geopolitical context, okay?
But by the way, this is more than okay with me, as it is part of my own approach later. So thank you. And please, by all means, go ahead.
Sure. So in layman's terms, right, the electronic device that travels with us the most after our cell phones are cars. They go home with us, they go on dates with us, they go to meetings with us, and they go on holiday with us often. As a result, if I wanted to understand somebody's movements and I don't have access to their phone, their vehicle is probably the next best place to look. And when we look at either plug-in hybrids or fully electric vehicles, there's a lot of soft underbelly access, right? Especially because these vehicles are meant to last a really long time. They have a technical shelf life of 10 to 15 years, technically, right? They require less maintenance than traditional vehicles. They just haven't been around long enough for us to really see their long-term utility before they get replaced by newer models in the hands of a given owner. Some of them are connected to the internet at all times, and some of them aren't. And as a result, there could be huge gaps in when updates are made to firmware, software, and antivirus security software that sits on these electric vehicles. vehicles. So unlike our cell phone, which we have, let's say decent awareness today about security needs, and there's McAfee and other apps, some are free, some are not. And the manufacturers, both of hardware and software, are constantly pushing updates into this device from a security perspective. Not all electric vehicles have a SIM. And as a result, those updates may be far more infrequent. So on the one hand, we have a device that is harder to secure. And on the other hand, it has many more access points than a cell phone. Yes, my phone can fall victim to Wi-Fi spoofing and phishing scams. However, my electrical vehicle could be plugged in a given month into 5 or 6 different physical charging stations. Each of those charging stations, if I'm not home, might require a different app to use in order to activate. Who is ensuring the security of these apps? We have all the same supply chain security issues that we face in regular vehicles. However, the utility in a data-enabled vehicle, whether it be EV or not, is far greater. So we have an item that stays with us for longer than a phone, that's harder to secure, that has many soft access points, in use by a global community that has far less awareness about the cybersecurity concerns of their smart and or electric vehicles. And that's completely agnostic to the developer. That's completely agnostic to the threat. But the reality is, I think that our electric vehicles are extremely exposed. Although there aren't really great case studies where they're being used nefariously yet, no doubt the same way we saw over the past year pagers and beepers being used in nefarious ways, you can only imagine what's happening with our electric vehicles. So I'll pause here at this point, and I think that my 2 other colleagues are far better equipped to get into the geopolitical ramifications of this and what's right and what's wrong in terms of geopolitical practice. But I just wanted to, at least in the beginning, map out what's the threat and share some raw data. So that's it from my end until now, and I look forward to discussion and questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eitan. And now for my 7 minutes, which have been considerably reduced by a little overage elsewhere. Uh, Recently, I published a paper on the risks, on the cyber risks to Europe and the US posed by Huawei's penetration in Europe, but especially in Spain. And curiously enough, Eitan, on the cyber cars. You see, the cyber cars represent a problem everywhere, whatever the brand. But Chinese manufacturers are obligated by a law that has been in place in China since 2019 that forces the manufacturer to share all data obtained from the cars directly with the Chinese government. I don't know that there is such a law anywhere else in the world that would force a manufacturer to share all of the personal data and use of the cars with their governments as it is in China. Therefore, Chinese EVs, of which Spain is importing more than anybody else in Europe, eh, are nothing but little data boxes with wheels that contain all the information necessary to map out, for instance, the movements of the American soldiers based at Rota, or the movements of the personnel assigned to the security of Torrejon. And that is one of the biggest problems, and that is a huge backdoor opened. What Spain has been doing is significant because I don't know of any other state actor in Europe that has opened the door to Chinese uh, uh, bad actors in the way that Spain has done. While the core 5G is still barred to Huawei because of European restrictions, they have given Huawei everything from the control of phone tapping in Spain, which is done through a centralized office called CITEL. And all of the judicial tapping in Spain is done now by Huawei, meaning they have access to every communication anywhere in Spain at all times. If we put together the infiltration of actors like Huawei, the dissemination of little square data boxes with wheels, and the inability of the state to respond to hacking, we have quite a formula. And it doesn't affect Spain only, it affects NATO. We do have bases in Spain, and those are fundamentally important for the protection of the Mediterranean in particular. And nobody can pick up a phone or drive around without being registered by the Chinese intelligence. This is nonsense. In the US, I agree with Jeff. Uh, Politics aside, just looking at the evidence, had there not been a change in the administration, we'd be worshipped in Spain. And we are picking up the consequences of that. These enormous Chinese operations in New York and New Jersey, for instance, with the capacity to completely freeze all communications in the greater New York area, never mind denial of service attacks everywhere else, it was just discovered, but they're older and they were installed under the noses of everybody who wasn't looking a year ago. So we do face a problem, a serious one. I am, and probably Jeff is too, uh, the beneficiary of a U.S. government free ID control software because the Chinese obtained all of my data in 2014 when they hacked the Office of Personnel Management. Indeed, there are several million Americans who held or applied for security clearance, whose information has been in the hands of the Chinese for 10 years, and that of their families and that of their friends. Our vulnerabilities are huge. And in today's ever changing warfare, as we move deeper into fifth generation warfare, giving the keys of our, giving the cyber keys to China is frankly suicidal. And I'm going to cut it there because I want to kind of like leave an opportunity for discussion. And what do you think, Jeff? Am I anywhere near correct on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to your point with the electric vehicles, yeah, I mentioned the facts with the development of the smart cities across the world. More and more in the future, you're seeing those vehicles interconnected. The
Yes.
Internet of Things, IoT, ICT. You mentioned New York, more of the hybrid physical tampering of communications. Here's where you can bring up a geopolitical point with the United Nations. China has lead roles in terms of some of the committees, focus groups with the International Telecommunications Union, ITU, to standardize some of these technologies and how they are used. And if you have Chinese building car battery plants, that are part of that supply chain, that's very insecure. Um, we know because of the digital socialism that happens in China, there's no divide between the government and the people. And they're using this digital socialism in China to control their people. Why wouldn't they want to do that in the world? And so that to me causes a growing concern.
Who says they're not doing it?
Well, I told you we did some assessments at DNI in Spain, and other countries. I know people that, and the other thing that is concerning is their use of cyber. If we wanted to start talking about cyber war,
Yeah.
And they are targeting critical infrastructure much more than just the use for, say, espionage or to steal state secrets. And I think Taiwan, we really have to look at Taiwan and see how they're using cyber in some of this hybrid warfare as a prep of the battlefield per se in Taiwan, because with U.S. critical infrastructure, we don't know what the damage is, say from some of the typhoon activities, especially the telecommunications. And if you don't know what the damage is, that means the danger is still there. So not just in the U.S., but other countries across Europe, the transatlantic, there needs to be a transatlantic partnership for cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. In the recommendations that I have for the problem confronting Spain, I believe that first, an assessment of how far the damage extends, a considerably larger effort for transparency and oversight, the banning of Chinese-made electric vehicles, the deployment of independent systems, secure satellite communications. Eh, that is absolutely impossible today. Certainly not with Spain's current government.
Wow.
But over time, I hope that will change.
Yeah, I think we have to insist, not only that we want a change in the government in Spain, which is quite obvious. We want to get rid of this kind of Maduro nightmare that is developing in Spain, with so many similarities to the very because they have very, very, very tight relations among them. The similarities with these regimes there, with Maduro regimes, and all these regimes who move with this narcotic kind of background in Latin America. I mean, there's a narco socialism, what we call it now, narco communism, narco socialism. The enormous amount of money that these regimes and these forces, these left wing forces, getting from the drug dealing is enormous, and it's an enormous danger now in Colombia. To 1 year before the elections, the president is openly going to open pacts with all the organized crime all over the country to control territorially the country in the same way and pattern that was used in with Chavez in Venezuela 20 years ago. So and there you have definitely China as well, and you have the Chinese and cooperation with the cartels in Mexico, as well as a really direct danger to the United States and its security. So there are many dangers which go beyond, if you want, this cyber question, but the cyber question is vital because it is the way that they want to get power and to control the societies in the free world, and we have to get this conscience of self-defense, which was lost in most of the societies in the Western world, and we have to go to take measures for self-defense, which are difficult in our economies, but which I think will be inevitable in a very, very, very near future.
Thank you, Herman. Eitan, I I just hinted. You mentioned with great uh, poignancy the risk of electric vehicles and how they can be hacked through apps in charging stations. And I mentioned that perhaps hacking is the least of your troubles, since manufacturers are in constant communication with vehicles nowadays, whether electric or combustion engines.
Mhm.
And uh, that information is generally private. It could theoretically be accessed with court orders or depending on the jurisdictions. But in the case of Chinese electric vehicles, all of that native information is accessible by the Chinese government and intelligence services. In fact, by law, it has to be shared. It, doesn't that put Chinese electric vehicles in a special category when we are talking vulnerabilities?
In many ways, yes. Of course, such laws put them in a league of their own in that regard. The reality is, as my co-panelists have mentioned, most of the world is quite apathetic to that fact, right? And so that's why I chose to even take a step earlier and talk about general vulnerabilities, but 100%. But I want to paint a alternative threat picture, which is equally potent. Okay, you had brought up, Saul, yourself, a personal experience of having your data accessed through a now almost decades old major cybersecurity breach by a foreign government. I believe that, as you mentioned, the mere fact that manufacturers are today in constant data communication with their vehicles in the hands of private owners, that if I was a state actor interested in acquiring data, I don't need to necessarily have a relationship with a manufacturer to obtain that data.
Right,
State-sponsored hacking will most likely, by some of the most powerful intelligence services on earth, be able to gain access en masse from any particular manufacturer through force. And if they're able to gain access to the records of those who applied for security clearance, I don't see what is preventing state actors from accessing the data from car manufacturers.
let me say this. We have about 15 minutes to go. So to close this, to bring it home, what can we do to mitigate this risk? What would be the number one recommendations, short of going back to the abacus and shutting down everything electronic? Uh, what is it that the US and the European Union can do to mitigate the danger of cyber warfare, cyber espionage, and intelligence gathering by bad actors?
Well, as I say, I don't, I can't imagine. I can't. It's very difficult to convince a society like ours to get to shut down some things. But I think we definitely will have to do it. I think we are going to. We have to think over many of the things that we have tolerated, or we have get used to. Many things are really too dangerous it's a luxury which is
Let,
too dangerous to afford.
let me ask you something that you might know, Herman. The European Union is almost infamous for his rather comical responses sometimes to threats. I remember that the
Almost
answer,
always.
almost always, I remember that the answer to a threat of propaganda from Russia led the European Union to create a special unit to counter Russian propaganda, which they staffed with three nerds in a basement with a budget of $1 million per year, or rather 1 billion euro per year, which of course means that within about 3 weeks of the announcement, nobody could find them anymore, though they were still working in the basement. Eh, I understand they have recently approved a unit to counter cyber warfare
Yeah, yeah, we have,
against European nations.
but
It,
don't.
what,
But
what is it? The same thing?
Saul, we shouldn't be fooled by the language of the bureaucrats in Brussels. I mean, what they really are looking for is control themselves, the control over their own people. What they are trying is this alliance of a socialist and socialist in disguise, which are now still in majority, but every time in less majority in the European Union, and they are losing one election after the other. They are trying to bunkerize themselves, and they are trying to cut free speech and to control, bringing all kinds of pretexts of excuses and threats from outside. They want really the Europeans to shut up, because the Europeans are every day louder, saying we don't want what is happening in this moment. Look what happened in Romania. In Romania, the elections were there. The Georgescu was winning and was going to win the second round. And when the second round had started already, they said there was a cyber intoxication of the election process by Russia, and they simply inhabilitated Georgescu and finished, and that was it, full stop. I mean, they haven't bring any proof about any kind
It,
of of,
they
of the support of Russia to this candidate, but this candidate is inhabilitated, is disqualified, and is gone. And they have
they
now
they have
they
they
lie.
have in fact, Herman, 4 months after the fact, they admitted that there is no proof of any
Oh, no,
interference
they
in that
approve,
election.
and they are doing the same. And that's in the European Union. But look what is Starmer doing with Great Britain. I mean,
Oh
what
yeah,
is happening in Great Britain is absolutely monstrous,
yes
monstrous.
indeed,
Also in
yes
Germany,
indeed.
also in Germany and in other countries. But it's absolutely monstrous how they trying to control and really cut free speech by any means. And I'm speaking about all the this let's say mainstream power and governments that we have in the European Union, and especially, of course, the European Commission under von der Leyen. Today, we presented a motion of censure against von der Leyen. It was lost because the People's Party, that means the so-called conservatives, which are what you would call, Jeff, rhinos, or Saul rhinos. They
Now that's what I call social democrats.
Yeah, they
But
voted. They voted with the socialists.
yeah,
They voted with the socialists to support von der Leyen. Although
yeah.
von der Leyen is the symbol of the failure of the European Union in this moment.
Yeah, let me add a disclaimer that this is the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and we are a nonprofit organization. That's a joke.
Well, actually,
Hey,
it's quite accurate.
it,
We can also add that our individual opinions do not represent the opinions of the institute.
yeah, yeah, which is not my concern. You said it very well, and we have a problem, and we have to acknowledge. I remember when there was talk, say within the Defense Department of War strategy and policy on containment and Cold War. Then unfortunately we had to start dealing with terrorism and counterterrorism. We've shifted, and I think China is a greater problem than what we ever witnessed with the Soviet Union. And I say that, and I go way beyond just technology. Look at Hollywood. Look at some of the practices against our kids. It's war against our kids when you look at DEI initiatives and all of the practices that have been going on in our schools. So this is an all-out Sunju policy that China has implemented against us, and to counter that, we have to respond. Fortunately, I think in this administration, you're going to see more policy revolve around that, especially now if we come back to technology and cyber. We need to better compete against China economically and militarily. And you're starting to see that. I mentioned the AI action plan. But keep in mind, China's foundation is the Made in China plan, and you are seeing the results of that in the U.S., in Europe, across the globe. So that's number one. Is we need policy, and very specific in the cyber realm. We need more of a threshold policy. If China has cyber capabilities that are planted in our critical infrastructure right now, how is that different from a Patriot missile system on the border with the U.S. or say like you did see during the Cold War in Cuba? We sanctions aren't going to work with China. Our deficit, at least from the U.S. perspective, is I think well over 2 trillion. And I mentioned that China expects to have a GDP 7 trillion of that by 2030, just based on technology alone. So this isn't a sanctions economy solution. I believe that we need to have more of a kinetic response, whether that be offensive cyber capabilities against China if they're hitting critical infrastructure like a electrical plant, or at least showing a presence. And so that's number one. And then more from, I mentioned a transatlantic partnership perspective. I think NATO has a role with this, and I think it's worthy. Perhaps there is a coalition within Spain that's willing to bring this up with NATO as an Article 5 issue. We know that Spain's been compromised by China, but yet they're working together with China. We know China has compromised us, but yet we're working together in some respects with China. So we need more of um, a, a policy that identifies if you cross this line, there will be consequences, and we just haven't gotten to that point yet, and I think that would be number one, and I think NATO could really flex their fist a little bit in terms of this issue. And we're not even talking about the internal issues with China, which could be worse than the Holocaust when you're looking at the Uyghur community in China, and how they're being killed, because of who they are, what their ethnicity is, and we don't know what the damage is to that community, and so there's just several other issues beyond just the technology and the 5G and the cyber. It's a problem, and again, let me emphasize, I think much worse than what we were dealing with the Soviet Union. And in terms of more short-term issues to be watchful of, Taiwan and a possible conflict in the South China Sea.
Thank you, Jeff. Eitan,
Yeah.
Last but not least,
Two very quick points. One is at a geopolitical level, the other is at a practical level. I agree very much with what the last panelist said regarding an eventual more aggressive posture from the United States under President Trump vis-a-vis China. This is something that we wrote about extensively to our client network over the past 6 months, that sometime over the next year and a half, we can expect some major U.S. muscle to be flexed against China. Exactly what that looks like and where and when is yet to be seen. On a practical level, I think that we need to accept the reality, for good or for bad, the rest of the world will not behave the same way the U.S. has towards Chinese manufacturing, and we're going to live with it in much of the rest of the world, for good and for bad, right? We talked about some of the downsides. The upside for the average person is oftentimes they're providing something that's very affordably priced, which honestly matters more to the average human being. But we can still be vigilant, right? And if I was a Western government knowing that this compromised technology will be out there, I would be focused on education of my populaces. You know, if I'm going to again distinguish between the American government versus others, the American government should be educating Americans traveling overseas on the risks of using certain vehicles from certain manufacturers, where you should or shouldn't be connecting your device to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and so on and so forth. And you know, it's going to be more about mitigation than prevention when we talk about this space, in my opinion. That's how I would wrap things up. This problem is unavoidable. How do we minimize exposure is, I think, the name of the game.
well, thank you so much. And gentlemen, I think there is much more to talk about this. I have more questions than when we started an hour ago. But alas, I promised you an hour, and we are almost on top of it. Um, I do believe that mitigation, Eitan, is uh, indispensable. We should be doing that now. Education, definitely. Although I have to say that this task of educating the sovereign doesn't always work as expected. Uh, People are too attached to their prejudices on occasion, making that Herculean task even more difficult. Uh, Stopping China, short of going to war, I believe is not as difficult as some would say. There is plenty of cheap labor in this world, and a lot of countries that can produce the same at or below Chinese rates. So that is something that may take time, but the transfer of certain technologies, Western technologies outside of China into more amenable environments, is not an impossibility, and it should be considered immediately. Uh, there is no reason why we should allow China access to our most sensitive military and intelligence assets so that we can save $10 on an Apple phone. It doesn't make any sense to me. Perhaps that's where the first priority should lay. As for the rest, I totally agree with all three of you, different perspectives, but a commonality of sense that is so difficult to find. I'd like to thank you, and if you have a last word, this is the moment.
Yeah, Saul, if I could mention, and actually this is an invitation to everybody on this, to the three of you and other fellows at the Gold Institute. But we are hosting a cyber experts roundtable on November 6th. There'll be some information starting to go out. We're still waiting for some hopeful RSVPs, but we already have several confirmed who are absolute experts in this area. One in particular, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery. He was the the executive director for the initial Cyberspace Solarium Commission. He's confirmed with us for our morning session. And then we also actually have the former NIO, the National Intelligence Officer for Cyber. He'll be moderating one of the panels. Those are two examples of individuals, leaders that we have confirmed. But again, it's going to be November 6th. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. And our chair, retired General Mike Flynn, he's going to be hosting this roundtable at the Homer building. But again, there'll be more details going out over the next few days. And again, thank you, Saul. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
I'll try to make it. And thank you, Hermann and Eitan. And I hope we can renew this conversation in the not too distant future.
Thank you
Thank
very
you, sir.
much.
Bye bye.
Good day.
Fine to see you.